Yes, welcome in. We're back and plenty to talk about, Jesse, as we head into the weekend here. But first, initial impressions of Jeff Grimes.
Exactly who they needed because he's bringing, I feel like it's not exactly bringing sexy back, but he's bringing Wisconsin football back, or at least he says that he will, to what worked once before. But talking season is one thing, and football season is another.
We all have different ideas of what sexy is. So, a lot of Wisconsin fans probably do think a running game, power running game that he has promised will be pretty sexy. So we'll see exactly how it is. We're going to talk about Jeff Grimes and talk about Jesse's story that he has up on the Athletic with after Jeff Grimes spoke earlier this week. Also, just put up a story about Kenny Guiton, the wide receivers turned quarterbacks coach this morning on the Athletic. So go check those out for sure. Then we're going to maybe talk about Luke Fickell and Junior Day and maybe something else. We'll see. What else do I have over here? Oh, transfer portal news as well. So we got some transfer portal news to talk about as well. But we're going to dive into it first with the coaches before we do. The camp is sponsored in part by Home Field Apparel. They have the best vintage gear possible in the game. You go check it out. Just loads and loads and loads of new stuff coming out every single week in Wisconsin. Just recently here in these last couple of months with new stuff as well. So go check them out. Homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. That certainly helps the show. All right, let's jump into this, and we'll start with Jeff Grimes because he was the big name, or I should say the big hire that everyone was waiting for, as Phil Longo is now the head coach down at Sam Houston State, has a couple of quarterbacks that Wisconsin used to have on their roster, has also a cornerback that Wisconsin used to have on its roster as well. But Phil Longo out in the middle of November, and Jeff Grimes hired in December. And you guys, I got a chance to talk to him earlier this week, and you wrote your story about him. And I'm wondering for you what stood out most, because I actually have something that I think really stood out to me. And it was not something that he said. It was something that Kenny Guiton said that's also in your story.
That stood out to me as well. We'll get to that. Obviously, I mentioned at the outset what Jeff Grimes is bringing here is a physical power style of football. And I think that's probably music to Badgers' ears after what they saw the last 2 years. But I also want to make it clear that what he's going to do is not going to be in exact replication of what Wisconsin football used to be. And I dove into the numbers in the story. You look at what he's done. Most of the snaps come out of the shotgun. Like 97.5% of the snaps last season at Kansas were shotgun snaps. And Phil Longo's tenure here was 98.4% shotgun. Obviously, Wisconsin is going to have much more versatility with the ability to go under center. But I think that's one illustration of what's going to be different, and the personnel packages as well. We know that Phil Longo loved 11 personnel, which had 3 receivers. Jeff Grimes actually used that the majority of the time at Baylor, at Kansas, about 50%, whereas Phil ran it maybe 62% of the time. But what's different are going to be the 2 tight end sets, the 12 personnel, which I think could really help Wisconsin this season. And you're not going to see 4 wide, no tight end sets, which is what Longo ran the second most in terms of personnel packages. So it's a different way to get to the plan, but it will resemble more of what Wisconsin did well previously, because Jeff said, if you can't run the ball, you can't do anything. So everything has to start with that. And the passing game, you're going to work the play action. And so I think that's based on 2 failed seasons of the Phil Longo experiment. It's what Wisconsin needed. It's just that Wisconsin had to deal with the last 2 seasons first.
And you've seen what Jeff Grimes can do running the ball. Some of his teams, I believe his Kansas team last year, who was like just absolutely ground into the ground. That's horrible. The fans just killed him. And yet they ran for more yards last year than Wisconsin has since 2019. Like per game. They were like at 212 or 213 yards a game, right?
Yeah, they were a top 15 rushing offense.
Yeah.
And he also had a top 15 rushing offense in 2021 with Baylor. Now, obviously, a couple of years at Baylor didn't match that season. And I know Kansas fans weren't happy with the results last season overall. But just stylistically and where Wisconsin is as a program and what it needs, this is exactly what Luke said when we talked to him back in December about what he was looking for. This style of coach who could bring a lot of the staples that Wisconsin did in the past, but also take what Phil did well in the passing game and expand on that.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot in that story. You can go check it out. But I wanted to bring up the Kenny Guiton quote here because I think it is one of those things that certainly got a lot of play when Phil Longo got fired. There was a lot of rumblings around it, and that was that he was a guy by himself, a guy who was running things by himself, was not necessarily taking anybody else's advice, not taking any direction from anybody or bringing people together to build that offense. It was going to be him or it wasn't going to be anything. And we heard Luke Fickell say that, right? Like it can't just be about one guy. Now he didn't actually say Phil Longo's name, but we know what, I mean, we feel like we know that's what he was saying. And so Kenny Guiton's comment the other day that's in your story, it says, Coach Grimes' openness to make sure that he has everyone involved is something that just sticks out the first time you get a chance to meet and talk with him. He makes sure everyone else feels involved. No matter who you are, you have a voice. You have a voice, so if you speak up, he's able to at least take into account what you're saying. Whether we build in that or not, it's just awesome to be able to open yourself up and say, hey, I don't mind bringing up my idea because at least I'll be heard. He's been awesome about that. That is as big of a rebuke as I think as we've heard about. And again, I'm taking this based on Luke Fickell's comments about how he felt, and we certainly heard stuff from other people as well. That is as forceful of a comment about Phil Longo as I've heard from the coaching staff. I don't think I think it's about Grimes, but I think it's also a note that this is not how it was last year.
That is how I interpreted the comment. And of course, sometimes in these situations we're left to parse, but I feel like this is a notable comment that is about one person and yet is also about another person. It's not the first time that I've heard this type of thing about what it was like. And of course, we know what Phil Longo's offense was. He was one guy signaling in from the sideline. It was his show. And this is about two people, certainly. And so I don't know what the offense exactly is going to look like, but we know when Luke was talking about what he was looking for, he used the words like leadership in that room and collaborative effort. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that's what you want out of your coordinator because all these other guys have thoughts and ideas. And even if you are the OC and you're ultimately the one in charge of making the decisions, this staff has to work well together in order to function properly. And I think it's safe to say that that's not what we saw the last 2 years. And I go back even to year one because I remember talking to Luke last offseason, and he said that the two things he was looking for going into year two were leadership and alignment. And the alignment wasn't from the players, it was from the coaching staff, which is why you saw those guys leave. So, or at least in part, I think that's been an issue here in the first 2 years. And hopefully for Wisconsin's sake, they can be on the same page entering year three.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Mike Brown, the wide receivers coach the first year for Luke Fickell, when we first got the chance to talk to him, or maybe it was in the spring, and he was talking about we know what Phil has, and we know what we were bringing from Cincinnati, and we're going to bring them together. And this, we heard that obviously on the defensive side, meshing the elite, but you heard it from the other side too, right? It wasn't strictly just going to be Phil Longo's air raid offense. It was going to be some of the stuff that happened at Cincinnati as well. And I don't know that was actually the case in year one. And in year two, someone had their had their finger on the scale, their thumb on the scale, because it was a different looking offense. And Phil Longo was clearly not happy about it. And I get his unhappiness. You run an offense the way that you've run it for how long, and what he defined it as a Ferrari, and you're just continuing to make it better each day or each year, just trying to, strip something down here or put something in here. And yeah, like that's what he viewed the offense as. And when it came to Wisconsin, it was, well, we're not just letting you run your Ferrari out there. We're going to throw some bigger tires on this thing. And, it's going to be a little bit more, it's going to have a little bit more power to it. And I don't think that ever really worked with Phil Longo. So yeah, Grimes is going to be different for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things I used that comment about the Ferrari because it was one of the things that stood out from the first time we talked to Phil 2 years ago when he was introduced for the first time to us as the new OC. and quarterbacks coach, and juxtaposed it against the way that Jeff Grimes was talking about his big thing that he says he's talked about with the offensive players is this idea of toughness over tactics, where everybody out there who's a coach calling plays, they have cool plays, and that's great. But what matters is your toughness, your mentality, your approach in order to execute those types of plays. And so obviously you need to call good plays in order to have a successful offense. But it just seems like holistically what he believes in so much more aligns with what Luke wants and what obviously Wisconsin football has been about for so long. And we talked about this before, Zach. Like, let's not pretend what Wisconsin was at the end of the Paul Crest era was great, even if you were doing pro style power football. But obviously, there's a certain style that has worked here for a long time. And it's clear that we know Luke wanted to do something different to so-called modernize the offense and have a better passing game, and that's fine. It's just that the pendulum swung so far in the wrong direction, or the other direction, that he's had to make a course correction here to better marry the two concepts.
Yeah, exactly. So the other story you have up on there is Kenny Guiton and his journey from being a quarterback at Ohio State to not actually coaching the position for the last 10 years, and finally getting an opportunity to do it here at Wisconsin. And I think when we talked about when the announcement, or when it came out that he was going to get the promotion, we're like, well, he probably was not the first choice. There's no way you just make him the first choice. Why you would just have done it right away if he was the first choice. But it sounds like, and Grimes said this, they talked to a lot of people and brought people in for interviews. And at the end of the day, and again, we'll take him at his word for this. At the end of the day, Kenny Guiton was the best choice. And it was essentially unanimous among the coaching staff that was in the room that he was the right choice.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming, and he's had an interesting career path because obviously as a player, his career was as a quarterback. And I asked him, well, if this was your dream, which is what he said, why didn't you pursue being a quarterback's coach? It made a lot of sense. He needed a job. And sometimes you can't just be the quarterback's coach. He was a grad assistant with Tom Herman at Houston. And obviously, Tom Herman was the OC when Kenny Guiton was at Ohio State, and they had a lot of respect for each other. And it was to coach the wide receivers for the most part. He said he dibbled and dabbled with quarterbacks, but it started out with wide receivers. And over time, he grew to like what he was doing. He's obviously a very effective coach with his ability to explain concepts to players and help them succeed. And then over 8 years as a full-time coach, he was a wide receivers coach at 5 different stops. But all along, he had this dream of wanting to impact a quarterback room. And this was the opportunity for it to happen. But he said he had his interview, which is standing up in front of all these coaches and explaining his philosophies and concepts. And he said he left the interview and he had no idea. He didn't know if he'd done enough. It was one of those things where he goes and he talks to his wife afterward and is like, well, should I have said this? What could I have done? Because he just didn't know. And Jeff Grimes talked about it. Yeah, they brought in a lot of people because it's an extremely important job. They talked to a lot of people on the phone. And ultimately, he said that the whole offensive staff sat in on these meetings. It wasn't just Luke and Jeff. And they realized that Kenny had a lot to offer. It wasn't just, this is a guy who understands football because he's coached wide receivers. He had philosophies and ideas about quarterback play that they felt like could move this group forward. And it just feels like there's something to be said for some level of continuity on this staff, even if he hasn't worked with these specific quarterbacks. He's been around the program for a year. He knows the wide receivers. And I think we heard a lot from players about that, the level of positivity that he had this year. And just you can tell when you talk to a guy what they bring to the table to some degree. We're not in the meeting rooms. I think that kind of stuff matters. I think he can be a really effective recruiter. And this is a job that means a lot to him. So I'm interested to see what this looks like in the quarterback room. But he got a 2-week head start on this, which which he acknowledged mattered a lot. After Longo got fired on that Sunday after the Oregon loss, well, what did they do? You have 2 regular season games remaining. He handled both the wide receivers and the quarterbacks, and he said that he felt like that at least allowed him to have a shot at this job because he showed his versatility and what he could do. And he also did the same thing the year earlier when he was at Arkansas, because after the OC quarterbacks coach got fired through 8 games, he took over those responsibilities on an interim role. So he does have versatility and he has done a lot as a coach.
He definitely has. He has done a ton. Yes. The thing I like about Kenny Guiton, and we got to see a little bit of this last spring when we had a chance to talk to him. He does have a lot of energy, and he's a positive guy, right? and I think he can be a very good recruiter, but I think he also holds guys accountable for the. I know some people would be like, well, all those drops they didn't get held accountable for, but which I mean, who do you want to put on the field instead, right? Like Will Pauling and Tresh Kakuna are your top slots, and Pauling didn't have a great year catching the ball, and he dropped some the previous year too. But he's one of your best guys. You wanted him to be on the field when he was out there. So the accountability of that, whatever. But the accountability off the field when it came to Kyan Barry Johnson, who every other player on the field last spring had a Motion W decal on their helmet. Everyone, except him. He was, and I asked Kenny Guiton, what's the deal with that? Does he have to earn it? He goes, hell yeah, he has to earn it by going to class. and so he did earn it. He got to class, and just because he was an early enrollee, he's first few months of college. It's a little bit of probably a bit of a culture shock, and college is not high school. There's the academics aspect of it is a significant jump up, but hold him accountable, coach him hard, and make him be better. And I think Kyan Barry Johnson is going to be a playmaker for them. If it's not this year, then at some point in his career, because he's got some really, really good ability. And I think we're going to see it this year. We saw it a little bit in fall camp, but I'm excited. He's one of those guys that I'm excited to see in spring, because I feel like he's probably taken a pretty significant jump physically than where he was last spring and in fall camp.
One thing I appreciate about talking to Kenny is the honesty that he's willing to provide to us. And it's like, well, if you're willing to be that honest with us, he's being honest with his players. And he was asked about the wide receiver room, since obviously he just spent the last year there. Specifically, he was asked about the Tresh Kakahuna situation, since Tresh entered the portal and came back at a time when Kenny was still in charge of the receivers. And he just said, in full honesty, I knew it was going to be hard to keep both Will and Tresh because they eat off the same plate. And he sat down with Tresh, and it was like, hey, man, I understand where you're coming from. And I just thought that was interesting, like to have a coach acknowledge, like, I'm looking at these two guys. They do the same thing. They're both really good for us and where we're at in college football. Yeah, he said we can sell the world to them. And sure, maybe it would have been possible, but it's just looking at things through a realistic prism. I felt like was refreshing that he's willing to share that with us. And I do think that was noteworthy because of, I think, what it reflects about how he talked to his players. But another thing was him talking about his philosophies as a quarterbacks coach, because this is a little different for Wisconsin. The last time Wisconsin had a true quarterbacks coach was the 2020 season when John Budmeyer was here, because after that, Budmeyer left to be the offensive coordinator at Colorado State. Paul Chryst took over handling the quarterbacks, and obviously we know Phil Longo was both the OC and quarterbacks coach. Having a dedicated quarterbacks coach is something that Luke felt was really important this offseason, and Kenny's clearly going to impact them in a significant way. He wants guys who certainly can throw the ball, but he talked about the importance of having some athleticism and mobility, because he talked about being able to create what he called a second play. So like, you got to work the pocket, and if it breaks down, you've got to use your legs. You've got to find guys that it wasn't the design play call. And he feels like he has that with the 3 scholarship quarterbacks in the room. And so I'll be very curious to see. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with what Jeff Grimes is calling and what he wants. But what is Kenny Guiton able to provide to this room that makes the quarterback room look different? Because let's be real about it. When's the last time the quarterback room here was effective enough on a level that you felt like was beyond what it needed to be? I mean, 2019 here, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's 5 straight seasons, and the last 4 seasons, the quarterback room as a whole hasn't completed better than 60% of its passes. So not nearly good enough, especially when you run an offense that's supposed to throw the ball more.
Yeah, not great.
No.
Not great. Not even just more, but better. And that did not obviously happen. There were flashes, but the flashes were very few and far between for sure for that offense. The other coach that you got to talk to, Jordan Reid, the wide receivers coach, came over from Western Michigan, and steps into a role that Kenny Guiton's able to help him a little bit with.
Yeah, he talked about that because Guiton's been here for a full year. He's able to explain, here's what worked, here's what these guys are all about, and you could tell, just as cliche as it is, there's a lot of gratitude for him to have this opportunity to go from a place like Western Michigan to all of a sudden you're being the wide receivers coach with the Badgers. And so I think there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm there. And the other coach that we got to talk to, Jack Cooper, who's now the safeties coach, was here last year. Again, just like Kenny Guiton. I think that stuff matters when you want some level of continuity because he's not coming in. Yeah, he's the fourth safeties coach in as many seasons, but at least he has familiarity with the defensive backs who are here, even though that number has gotten much smaller given where things stood with the transfer portal.
It has. So are you going to be doing stories on those two?
I am not at this time.
Okay.
I used up what I had on Grimes and Guiton.
I got you. All right. Well, we'll learn more about those guys as we get into spring ball and see them on the field coaching their guys for the first time. Let's transition here to some transfer portal news as Wisconsin got another one of its 2023 recruits back from the portal. Tretch was the first one, and now Jamel Howard is back. He went to the portal for whatever reason, is now back at Wisconsin, and I think it's a good thing, even though he hasn't necessarily jumped out and set the world on fire or even lit a match. And he's back, and he's 6'2", 6'3", and he's 330 plus pounds. Those guys don't grow on. I mean, those guys just don't grow. There's not a lot of guys like that. I should say he is a different body type, and hopefully, I think for Wisconsin's sake, they're hoping he figures it out.
Right. Even if he hasn't given you anything statistically, getting a guy like this back at this stage, it's as good as a transfer portal ad, as far as I'm concerned. He's already got 2 years of development in this system. I know he redshirted in year one and we didn't see him on the field, but we talked before about these 5 transfer portal additions they brought in on the defensive line. You had 11 scholarship guys at the time going into next season, and only 3 of them were on the team a year ago. So now you have 12 and 4, and at least there's some level of being able to build there. And I think there's a lot that Jamel Howard can potentially provide if he can figure it out, because that was a really huge recruiting win. I think it's so interesting, though, that Tretch and Jamel both committed to Wisconsin, decommitted, and Wisconsin was able to get him back in the final few hours. Now, Jamel stretched out to the February signing period, but then it happened again here with the transfer portal. So don't know where he's going to fit in here, but obviously he must have felt like this was one of his best opportunities to do so, and that after entering the portal, there's a reason why he wanted to come back and be a part of this.
Did I miss an opportunity to do the Tretch's back thing again? Did I miss my M&M opportunity with Jamel Howard? I totally forgot. I was actually talking about it this morning on the morning show with Ebo, and I was like, yeah, that's very Tretch-like. And then I just totally forgot about it when I was introducing that. That's a miss on my part, because I don't get too many opportunities to use music or use lyrics for anything because I'm not great at it. Had a chance, and I blew it. But so he's obviously transfer portal news coming back here, but we also have some final landing spots for a few other guys. And you tweeted about that or posted about that on Thursday. And now the only person missing, is there one guy missing a spot, or is everyone now locked in?
I don't think Nate Van Zelst, the walk-on kicker, has a spot, or at least it hasn't been announced. I don't know what that is, but obviously there were a few that were left out there, stragglers, I suppose, or just guys that didn't want to make it public. Cole LaCrue is at Eastern Illinois, in a good spot.
Home of
Tony Romo, of course.
So yeah.
James Duran's at Western Illinois, which I think is an interesting landing spot. Now, maybe a lot of that had to do with obviously AJ Blazek and his relationships, but for a guy who was a 4-star and was the highest rated guy, or one of the highest rated guys in Wisconsin's recruiting class that year, I'm surprised it's not at an FBS school. But as we've talked about, that doesn't mean you can't get there eventually, as long as you find yourself a opportunity for playing time. And then Max Lofi was one that I was really interested in, because I hadn't seen anything, and I just thought, well, is he going to come back? Like, they need a slot, and that was never in the cards. I touched base with him very briefly, and he said that he's enrolled at Rice University, and he's going to play the slot there and maybe a little bit of safety, but he felt like his time was up here. He wasn't, look, if you're leaving, it's because you're not happy with the way things are going, and there were some things that perhaps he felt like he wanted to have happen differently, and he graduated. Like he said, he spent his time here. He was here for 5 years, so he wanted to move on. But those are the roundup of the guys that were remaining about where they were going to go.
Yeah, so a couple of the other names, Nate White ended up at South Dakota State.
And he's going to play running back too, which makes a lot of sense, because Wisconsin transitioned him to wide receiver, and it just didn't work out here.
I mean, he does have some amazing hands and some great speed that can be a huge benefit in the pass game coming out of the running back spot. One of the best to ever do it in NCAA 25, or not NCAA, EA College Football 25. So I think, maybe they should at least run him on a few crossers because once he gets going, it's tough to catch him. So, yeah. I mean, of all these guys that ended up places, I don't like. I just look at them and I'm like, okay, I guess. There's nobody that I sit there and say, oh gosh, Wisconsin desperately needs that guy. Will Pauling would be the closest thing to it, but or James Thompson Jr. But it's tough. Like it's tough to sit there and say, oh, they need this guy and they need that guy that ended up leaving, largely because of what they did in the portal and replacing them. And at wide receiver, you had Tretch already there, and you have Kyan Barry Johnson behind him. And as you mentioned, there's not going to be a ton of 4 wide receiver sets, so it's largely going to be one of those guys on the field at a time, unless they felt comfortable enough to use them on the outside. And we did not see that one bit when it came to Phil Longo.
I ranked the transfer portal departures by tiers in a story that ran, I think, last week. And if you're looking at guys, they really could have used him. There weren't a ton of guys. I mean, the Xavier Lucas situation, obviously, we've talked about enough. But in terms of what his potential was, he could have started as a sophomore here. Could have been a multi-year starter. We saw some of that potential last season. So I had him in the kind of the biggest sting factor.
That's my bad. I've been trying to put that out of my mind, so I completely forgot about him.
Understandable. Certainly Will Pauling because of his productivity, but to your point, they've got Tretch back, and they'll be able to utilize some guys in that spot. James Thompson, strictly for that level of experience, 18 starts, and you would have liked potentially to have that back. I put Braden Moore up there too, largely because I just felt like he had so much potential and could have earned a starting spot, and maybe not. He only played 10 snaps last season. And again, you look at who they added, you feel pretty good about it on paper, but we've yet to see what that looks like because guys are moving up a level. Matt Young, obviously from Bethel, and Matthew Trainer from Richmond, which is in the FCS level. But most of the guys were just okay. You had experienced guys, but I think they're okay with having who they have replace them. I would say, if I'm looking at landing spots, I think a lot of times fans look at that and go like, oh, they ended up in the FCS. So what was Wisconsin doing with them? The biggest surprise to me, I think we've talked about this, is probably Braden Locke ending up at Arizona, just because it's another Power 4 program. I didn't know whether that was going to be a realistic option for him. Good for him, obviously, for having that shot. But on the whole, I didn't look at these and go, oh, my goodness, like what is happening? Oh, Braden Moore ends up at Toledo, or Amari Snowden's at Toledo, which – now he gets to play 2 sports. Once they're gone, they're gone.
Don't even pay attention to them.
I mean, it's interesting to see where they end up going, but I don't look at that necessarily as like a representation of what it means for why they were at Wisconsin. Like if you end up at an FCS school, you're evaluating a guy based on what they did out of high school, and 1 or 2 or 3 years down the line, it's a different type of evaluation, and you're going up against different players for those spots at the schools.
So I only looked at mainly at the guys that were productive at Wisconsin, or were productive at Wisconsin. That production fell off in the first year of Luke Fickell, and then they ended up somewhere else. So Skylar Bell, who went off at UConn, hit the transfer portal, and was supposed to end up at Michigan, did not end up at Michigan, is back at UConn. And then you think about Chimere Dike going down to Florida and doing what he did, very impressive. And then you got Keontez Lewis going down to Southern Illinois, and then now at Oklahoma. So, I was interested to see where those type of guys, ended up and what they did. But at this point, I mean, maybe I'll do the same thing for Will Pauling, and just keeping an eye on exactly where he's at. And we're certainly going to keep an eye on what happens down at Illinois with Kurt Neal and Leon Lowry and James Thompson Jr. So, yes, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's interesting to look it up once or twice a month during the season. I'll say that. But all right, let's jump into Junior Day. It's coming up on Sunday. Wisconsin is hosting. I think you told me it was at 8, or was it 10? How many is it?
I got my list at 8. There's always room for 1 or 2 if they can make it, but my list is 8 guys right now.
Can you tell me about some of these guys? Or just some names? Can you throw them out?
I can. I've got it pulled up here, so I can accurately relay the information. Yeah. So Last year Wisconsin did junior days on back-to-back Januaries, and this year it's a little more spread out. This is a much smaller one for Wisconsin. Their big one is going to be March 8th. And the reason they do it is coincide with a basketball game because you want to give them something to do. But
What's
one
the
thing
game on the 8th?
It's the Penn State
Oh.
game. I think it's the regular season finale, 7th or 8th. Yeah, I think it's the 8th. What I think is interesting here is that for as much as things have changed with the transfer portal, they still want to build these rosters with high school guys and get 20 to 25 players. And you're looking at this 2026 class now, and the only guy they have committed is Ben Novak because they no longer have Jaron Mock. So that's the preface to this, because they've got to start over every year and build these classes. But here's the list that I've got written down. Owen Cabell, I think, and if I'm mispronouncing his last name, I'll learn it if he commits. But so he's a wide receiver from Christ Presbyterian Academy, and I know that there's a lot of offers. I mean, obviously out-of-state guy, a lot of these guys out-of-state guys, but that's one wide receiver. Zach Washington is another one from the Chicago area. So there's a couple of receivers that they're bringing in here. Gavin Miller, who goes to St. Francis High School. They really like him. He came to a camp earlier and was really good.
Is that in-state St. Francis?
I don't think no.
Okay.
I don't think so. But so I think he's a tight end, and so he's one of the guys. Ben Novak is the one who's coming here. He's already committed. Big offensive lineman. There's another O lineman coming here named Claude Mpuma. He just transferred to Mount Carmel, which is the same school that Darian Dupree went to. He's like 6'8", massive guy, and kind of just starting on his offensive line journey. But obviously 6'8" dudes, you'll take that all day. A couple D linemen here. Let's see. Damari Simeon from New Jersey. Jake Johnson is the defensive tackle from Texas. And two more on the list here that are kind of like edge outside backer guys. Jackson Ford, who goes to Malvern Prep in Pennsylvania. That school ring a bell?
It does. That would be the home of Alex Hornibrook.
Yes. And then Titan Davis, who's kind of like an edge outside linebacker, defensive end type of guy. So that's the list that I have. Obviously covers a wide variety of positions. And I mean, you want to get them up here at a time when you give them something to do when they're out of state. And when you're in here on the first junior day, it means that they think very highly of you. So we'll see whether they can end up with any of those guys. But those are just some names to watch here moving forward in the 2026 class as they try to build this thing out.
Yeah. Again, you talked about getting 20-25 kids. Yes, you have to. You have to, because you're losing a significant amount of kids every year from your recruiting classes in general. So you have to build the numbers up. That's just, I think it's going to make sense. And there's no cap now either, right? In terms of guys that you can bring in. So yes, there's that. All right, let's finish with this. Got a question over on Blue Sky. Me and Jesse are both on Blue Sky, so if you want to follow us there, you certainly can. I need to post more over there because I know that I feel like things are starting to grow. Every time I log in there, there's like more people following me, and I really haven't posted a ton on there. So I'm going to try and do more of that. But I got a question from Nate, and I kind of like the question, and so I wanted to pose it to you. He says, a question for a future camp episode. What does Luke Fickell have to do this year to earn a contract extension? He gets an extension every year like that. It's a rolling extension. And if he doesn't, the only way it's a story is if he doesn't get the extension and that his contract's not still at 5 years. That's just how it works. His buyout goes down, right? But the years do not. And the money is the same unless he gets a raise. So I guess for me, it's since an extension is what it is, what does Luke Fickell have to do this year to earn a raise?
Honestly, I think just not get fired. I know that feels like a super simple answer. Maybe if they go 0-12 and it's absolute disaster, but then you're looking at potential firing.
There's nothing he could do to get a raise.
You mean to not get a raise?
I'm saying, what does Luke Fickell have to do this year to earn a raise at the end of the year?
Has to finish the year. Like, I don't see a situation where
you understand what I'm saying though? Like he turns this thing, it's like an 8 or 9 win team against this schedule. He's going to get a salary bump.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question then, because I thought you were asking me, like, what does he have to do to not get a raise? Much like the
No.
question was, what does he
The
have
the
to do to not get an extension?
the flips. No. I'm saying the raise thing. The flip side is what has to happen to get him fired.
Mm-hmm.
That's the question. There's two different questions. The raise question, like what does he need to do to get a raise?
Yeah,
I'm confused why I'm confused why you're confused.
because to me, all he has to do is finish the season and still be the coach, and he gets a raise.
A noticeable raise.
I don't know what notice. I think it's just whatever's built in. I mean, it was like $100,000 each year, was it not? I mean, you can roll your eyes. Like, I just think it's a super.
I did.
It's a
For
super
anybody
simple answer to me.
For anybody that's not watching, I'm talking about like, yes, you get a bump, $100,000 bump, but say you win 8, 9, 10 games, you don't think he's going to get a more significant bump? Like they're going to rework the contract and it's going to be a bigger contract?
Okay, so now we have tiered raises of not your standard raise, but what would Chris McIntosh see to give him more money than what he's already making?
Yes.
I honestly don't see that happening either. I just don't.
You are such a stick in the mud, man. Like
no, I'm being honest.
If he wins
$7.8 million on average.
If the dude wins 9 or 10 games, he's getting a bump against this schedule.
Okay. Well,
do we think that's going to happen? No. But if he does, that's the question. What does it have to what has to happen to get there?
Okay, college football playoff.
All right, we're done with this.
I'm just trying to be realistic about it. I think it is,
but you're not.
It's not going to change.
No. You're saying what does he? I'm not asking you to be realistic. I'm telling you. I'm asking what it would take for him to get a significant pay bump.
Okay, then we'll go with the playoffs because that's the standard. He already makes a lot of money.
What has to happen to get him fired?
Man,
is it like 1-11? 2-10?
I think it's got to be the biggest dumpster fire in the history of Wisconsin football, more than Don Morton.
Because like $32 million is a lot of money.
Yeah, there's a huge buyout. So I think we've talked about this before. It's at minimum 4 years, but it will be the greatest tire fire in the history of Wisconsin football, which is saying something because they had some bad teams for a long, long time, many years ago.
They did. And offensively, the teams last year, very close to those years, right? It was like 91 and 92. The worst back-to-back since then was these past 2 years. So we'll see. But really appreciate you playing along as usual. Really
I'm
hit
just
that
here
one.
To keep it real. Maybe
really
next time you just need to do a better job of explaining the question.
Really hit the question. Really hit that one out of the park. Really hit that one out of the park. Appreciate
good point guard sets his teammate up for an open shot.
Weren't you a point guard?
I was, but in this instance, you're the point guard. I'm the catch and shoot guy.
I feel like you know what I was saying, and you were just trying to be difficult.
Not at all.
Like I passed you the ball, and you like threw it right back to me because you didn't like the way exactly it was not in your catcher spot. Like it wasn't in your sweet spot, and so it had to be like it was too high by an inch. And then you threw it back at you, and you're like, nope, too low, just right. It's like, yeah, whatever. We figured this out. It's the playoff for you. All right. And to get fired, a dumpster fire of 1-11 or 2-10.
That would be pretty bad.
What if he won the first 2 games against obvious, the teams that you expect them to win, and then lost like 9 straight? Does he make it out of the year?
Yes. If you're going to get to 2-9, let's just get to 2-10.
2-10.
I don't know. I don't even know why we're talking about this. But
you want to know why we're talking about it?
Because somebody asked a question about it.
It's January 24th, Jesse.
Yeah, that's true.
What exactly yeah, we could talk about
until spring practice.
If you have something else that you'd like to talk about, we certainly can.
No, we got it.
You good? You good?
I'll come up with more material for the next one.
Okay, appreciate you. We only took your stories and your junior day stuff. We didn't really hammer in on any of this on any of the work that you did. Actually, we used all of your work, so it's good. All right. We will be back next week. Maybe Jess will be in a better mood. Maybe he'll be willing to play along a little bit more. But we'll see. We'll see. You just never know what you're going to get. Never know what you're going to get. I'm kidding. Thank you very much, Jesse.
I'm just here to keep it real.
There he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic, keeping it real. You've been listening to The Camp.